Hey, healthcare friends, do you dread doing your notes every day? Do you feel like you can never get ahead of charting? If you're shaking your head yes, keep listening. Freed AI is a medical scribe on a mission to free clinicians everywhere. Freed AI listens, transcribes, and writes medical documentation for you, written in your style and ready the moment the visit is over. All you have to do is give it to your patient. Just imagine leaving the office at the same time as your last patient. Freed is HIPAA compliant, secure, and takes less than 30 seconds to learn. Artificial intelligence cannot replace you, but it can do the administrative work that no human should be subjected to. Get back to doing what you love, helping your patients, and let Freed AI do the rest.
Hey all, welcome back to the Real Life Pharmacology Podcast. On this episode today, this is going to be one of two episodes. I'm going to tackle polypharmacy, and particularly the 10 commandments of polypharmacy that I developed over the years. Obviously, this isn't an end-all, be-all, but some of the most important things that you can do or recognize when working with patients and medications. So that's where I'm going to go with this today. Going to start with my number 1 through 5 of the 10 commandments of polypharmacy on this episode. And on the following episode next week, we'll cover the last 5, 6 through 10 there. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 1 commandment of polypharmacy: thou shalt not start, ask for, dispense, or administer a medication without reviewing a medication list that is accurate, up-to-date, and complete, including over-the-counter medications and supplements. I've seen this numerous times, whether it be in a long-term care facility or a patient at home, where they develop a new condition and we simply try to treat that condition. We don't try to rule out what else is going on. And when you work with patients a lot, you'll understand that they generally don't report everything that they're taking. You really have to pry to get that information out of them. So ensuring that list is accurate before we're considering, starting or administering or giving a new medication is super, super important. 2 of the drugs that I've probably seen over the counter that cause significant adverse effects, particularly in geriatric patients, are sleep medications. So something like the anticholinergics like diphenhydramine, for example, doxylamine, common medication found in Unisom and often cough and cold preparations that are PM or nighttime formulations. They cause a lot of constipation, dry mouth, dry eyes, which can ultimately lead to new diagnoses and or potentially new medications. I've even seen cases of worsening BPH symptoms with urinary retention. I've seen confusion and delirium leading to prescriptions of dementia medications. So very, very important thing to consider here is making sure that medication is actually accurate and complete. All right, number 2, thou shalt consider using non-drug approaches and interventions to solve patient problems before initiating medication. Examples here include antipsychotics in dementia-related behaviors. Some clinicians, providers can be a little bit more quick to add medications than others. If you're a nurse or staff individual working with patients too, it's a very difficult job. There's no doubt about it in working with patients with dementia and behavioral issues. But if we can do whatever we can to try to avoid the use of medications, recall that antipsychotics do have a boxed warning for an increased risk of death when used in patients with dementia for dementia-related behaviors. So very, very important when it comes to dementia and behavioral issues. A couple other things, conditions that I think about anyway. Insomnia is another one. Very seldom Do I see non-drug interventions tried first and foremost? There are some clinicians that are better at it than others, I think. But it's super, super important to dig into that patient history and figure out, okay, are they taking, 2 cups of coffee with a bunch of caffeine at 8 p.m.? Well, let's get rid of that first before we start another medication. Another thing I consider is pain management. Our heat, ice, any type of massage therapy, anything going to be beneficial where we can avoid the use of a medication. Acetaminophen, generally is fairly tolerable in geriatric patients, but anything oral and systemic, that's kind of the next step, whether that be NSAIDs or opioids. I mean, there's tons of problems potentially associated with those medications, or potential problems associated with those medications. So, again, make sure that we're trying non-drug approaches and making sure that they actually fail, that they don't work for the patient prior to giving new medications. All right, number 3. Thou shalt assess if a medication is effective before adding a new medication for the same condition. All right, so a few disease states that ring a bell with this one. Psych disorders, anxiety, insomnia. Those are 2 common ones where I see numerous medications added, where we start a medication and month, 2 months, 3 months down the road, symptoms have not improved, and then we add a new medication, and we never go back and look and say, hey, was that first medication we added, was that actually effective? Pain management, I mentioned in the previous commandment there, but another good one to consider. If you add acetaminophen, you start it, not seeing any benefit, and you got to add another pain medication, let's make sure that acetaminophen really did do something. Now, there is some possibility for synergy with different analgesics and things of that nature, but I think it's definitely important to at least take a look and consider to reassess if we need all that medication on board. Another one that I've definitely tackled before as well too, maybe a little less common, is restless leg syndrome. Patients can often be put on gabapentin or pregabalin, and maybe we aren't getting the response that we want, so then we add a dopamine agonist on top of that, and maybe we add Sinemet on top of that. So I've definitely seen some polypharmacy in using multiple medications in restless leg syndrome. All right, number 4. Thou shalt consider any new symptom is an adverse effect of another medication until proven otherwise. And what this basically gets down to the heart of is this is the prescribing cascade, where you add a medication and then you encounter a side effect from that medication and you add another medication to manage that side effect. Now, there are some situations where that is intentional, and that's okay. That's going to happen in practice. So a couple intentional examples that you might see in practice, opioid therapy. We generally, if we're on opioid therapy in a hospice patient or anyone who needs it chronically longer term, we're generally going to need a bowel regimen. So basically medications to treat constipation. So essentially, what we're doing here is the prescribing cascade, but it is intentional. Another example of that is potassium supplements. So let's say we start furosemide or a thiazide diuretic, and potassium levels are dropping, or they're likely to drop, and so we add on a potassium supplement to basically manage that adverse effect of hypokalemia. However, there are numerous unintentional examples of the prescribing cascade, and I wanted to give you some of those examples that I look out for. So, first and foremost, if you see a new symptom, recognize it could be an adverse effect. That's your first step. It should be your first step in any kind of polypharmacy type patient. So I think of edema being a common one that shows up. Calcium channel blockers, NSAIDs, maybe pioglitazone. There's lots of medications that can contribute to edema and swelling, and we need to make sure those get ruled out. So naturally, the example of the prescribing cascade there is, you start an NSAID, you start calcium channel blocker, and then you see an order for furosemide to try to run some of that fluid off. Hypertension, elevations in blood pressure. This certainly can be medication worsened or medication induced. So stimulants, Sudafed, for example, those are a couple classic examples where it might cause a new start or an increase in hypertension medications. Confusion, dementia-type symptoms, anticholinergic medications can cause those, and then ultimately lead to new diagnosis of dementia and adding on dementia medications. Diarrhea, for example, metformin, incredibly common cause. If you see anti-diarrheal medications added, that should prompt you to go back and look at the medication list. One more example, pretty obvious example, hopefully, but muscle pain and soreness. If patients are reporting muscle pain all over and soreness, definitely could be caused by statins, and we don't want to necessarily treat the adverse effect with analgesics. We want to go to the source and address if that statin is actually causing that before we add a new medication there. All right, last but not least here of the first 5 of 10, we have thou shalt not start a medication without an appropriate indication and assessing appropriate lab work. Depression medications are commonly added to patients that I've worked with in assisted living and long-term care and ambulatory care as well. Patients can report symptoms of depression, and they can certainly mimic other disease states or diagnoses. So great example, I remember having a patient where they started on an antidepressant, an SSRI, and kept bumping up the dose, increasing the dose, still not getting any better. They're tired, they're not feeling well, feel like they're depressed, and ultimately TSH and thyroid labs got checked and showed that the patient was hypothyroid. So there we had a potential solution to our problem if that would have been assessed and addressed in the first place there. Another example I've seen is B12 deficiency be diagnosed. Sometimes patients can report neuropathy type symptoms with B12 deficiency. And so there, if patients are just coming and they're reporting, I've got some, non-specific neuropathy type pain, some nerve pain it feels like, and we could simply add gabapentin, add pregabalin, maybe an SNRI. We could try to manage those neuropathy symptoms, thinking that they're not associated with anything. And if we, don't check B12, if we don't assess other lab work, we could potentially miss that and ultimately lead to the prescribing cascade. So, good reminder, these are all great examples of things that could certainly come up on your board exams. So if you're looking for study materials on some of those pharmacist board exams, go check out meded101.com/store. Got plenty of resources there to help you pass your board exams. If you have any comments, suggestions about the podcast in general, things you'd like to see covered potentially down the road, feel free to drop me an email at mededucation101@gmail.com. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, definitely leave a rating or a review, and certainly feel free to share us with friends, colleagues, classmates, students, any healthcare professional that may benefit from a little more pharmacology education. With that said, I'm going to sign off for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you picked up a few practice pearls today. Take care.